Universities are supposed to be places of education and of learning, bastions of ideas, where the best idea is supposed to prevail, and students are taught cutting edge skills. One of those skills, of course, is mathematics, a rather useful skill if you're going to be engineering buildings, or trading stocks, or doing many other things in daily life. Now, while universities are supposed to teach cutting edge, useful mathematics, that isn't always what happens, even though it should be. And now universities have become beset by ideologues, pushing increasingly odd theories. The case in point is the idea that mathematics must be decolonized due to it being supposedly dominated by Europeans and being exclusionary. To this end, ANU has been promulgating the decolonization of mathematics, whatever that really means, possibly seemingly missing the fact that we use Arabic numerals when doing mathematics. Nevertheless, what they're saying is they're trying to remove the impact of supposed colonial mathematics. More specifically, and to be fair, some professors have been pushing for this. After all, professors spout nonsense all of the time. It doesn't mean that all professors believe this, it means that some do, and that has been picked up by the newsroom at ANU. So we shouldn't tar all academics with the same brush. But nevertheless, challenging this trendy nonsense could be a career-limiting move at almost any organization. So it's relatively unsurprising that no ANU professors seemingly have come out and challenged this. Now maybe I've missed that, but I haven't seen that in the media nevertheless. Now I'm slightly late to the party covering this rather absurd story. Both Sky News and Daily Insight have done so before me, and I'll link to their videos below. But hopefully I can add some additional insight or additional perspectives that maybe are somewhat useful. We'll see. So let's have a look at the article on ANU's website. Of course, it's gold. It reads almost like satire. It is so absurd. It starts with the idea, quote, "What constitutes mathematical knowledge? What is included in mathematics? Who gets to decide?" These are some of the questions being asked in a growing decolonization movement. So here we start with a logical premise. That is, that sometimes journals might be exclusionary sometimes. Maybe journals are nepotistic, maybe journals are biased. That's a valid question to ask about. But then it proceeds to an illogical conclusion that decolonization is the solution. Rather than perhaps de-biasing things and ensuring the best idea wins, it must be colonialism's fault, it seems. The article continues on stating, "Mathematics is a universal human phenomenon, and students of underrepresented and minority groups and colonized peoples are starting to be more critical about accepting unquestioningly the cultural hegemony of mainstream European-based mathematics." So, in this word salad, basically it seems there are too many white mathematicians who are behind a number of the theories that we use day to day. For example, calculus seemingly was pioneered by people like Isaac Newton. Now, he was in the United Kingdom. I'm not sure that that's a slight on Isaac Newton or calculus. I'm not entirely sure how him being in the UK is even at all relevant to whether or not calculus is itself relevant. So the whole colonization aspect of this appears to be a little bit more tangential. Now, to be clear, if good ideas have been excluded, those should be considered. However, it really depends on the idea itself, not where it came from. The article then states, "Mathematics has been gatekept by the West and defined to exclude entire cultures. Almost all mathematics that students have ever come across is European-based." Now, leaving aside the fact that we use Arabic numerals, which to my mind is itself a little bit telling and perhaps cuts across the whole premise of the article, this again is a little bit missing the point. I.e., if, for example, Western journals had excluded things from publication and therefore excluded knowledge, that's bad. But the mere fact that you have Western mathematicians is not per se bad. The mere fact you've got European mathematicians doesn't really tell us anything about the quality of the ideas, it just tells us they were based in Europe. The article then states, "Indigenous and First Nations people around the world are standing up and saying, our knowledge is just as good as anybody else's. Why can't we teach it to our children in our own schools, in our own way?" Here in Australia, we are still in the early stages of the decolonization journey. There is a curiously persistent trope that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples had only rudimentary mathematical knowledge, despite widespread evidence to the contrary. Now, the article doesn't actually tell us what that evidence specifically is. For example, if they have an alternative to calculus or linear algebra or analysis, well, that would be interesting to know about. If they have another way of, for example, calculating the rate of change of a particular thing, or the rate of change of that rate of change, that would be interesting to know about. If, for example, there's an alternative to how you construct matrices, that would be interesting to know about. Those types of things would be interesting, but they would need to actually be pointed out in this article. The article is somewhat question-begging. What exactly is this knowledge that should be brought into mathematics? The article states, to some extent to this end, what the general public think of mathematics tends to be whatever they learned, or more likely did not learn at school. But in many indigenous societies, mathematics is lived, from when you were born to when you rejoin your ancestors. Now, I have no idea what that really means. Mathematics being lived, I'm not sure. After all, we all are alive if you are watching this video, and mathematical equations can cover some of what's going on in the body. Mathematics is intrinsic, for example, to the idea of anesthetics. You need to be able to calculate volumes and the like in order to be doing anesthetics, or at least be able to have a grasp of it. So clearly, mathematics is part of our lived experience, to use the trendy term. But I'm not entirely sure what mathematics being lived actually means, and how simply being around mathematics makes you a mathematician or necessarily a mathematical genius. The article states about this. It's about formalized relationships within human society and with every element of the environment. Everyone is taught them, and the levels go up from birth to adulthood as you are ready for more knowledge. This mathematics permeates every aspect of life. Numbers and arithmetic and accounting are often of secondary importance in indigenous mathematics. So the article appears to be getting the idea that all of this learning is not really numerical. Now, that's not necessarily to say it's bad or good. It just isn't numerical. And if something is not numerical or involves calculations, it's not totally clear to me how that's mathematics. It appears to be a slightly odd tangent to say, well, this thing is non-numerical and it's lived experience, and it might be interesting, and therefore it must be mathematics. It could be something else, it could be some other area of knowledge, but to my mind it clearly is not mathematics if it doesn't involve calculations of some type. The article states, in fact, as most mathematicians know, mathematics is primarily the science of patterns and periodicities and symmetries, and recognizing and classifying those patterns. Even if that is the case, knowing that there is a pattern is very different from knowing the mathematics behind the pattern. The mathematics is the formalization of that pattern, putting it into equations, putting it into something you can study and replicate, something that is written down and can then be analyzed. Simply recognizing there is a pattern seems to be a little bit beside the point. The article states, indigenous societies often excel at non-numerical mathematics, whatever that happens to be. One interesting example is that we are currently investigating the use of chiral symmetry to engineer a long-distance smoke signaling technology in real time. Now again here, this is exactly what my point is. Chiral symmetry might be interesting. It might be interesting to look at smoke signals, but smoke signals per se are not mathematics. Using smoke signals does not involve using mathematics necessarily. Rather, the quantification of those, putting it into an equation, putting it into something that is written down, that might be mathematics. Simply knowing there is a smoke signal doesn't make you a mathematician, and it doesn't make you studying mathematics because you can see or use a smoke signal. So let's unpack what this surreal article says, because I see several major fundamental problems with it. First, what exactly is non-numerical mathematics? Well, to my mind, it simply is not mathematics. It might be its own thing, it might be interesting, but it is not mathematics. The question is, what is mathematics? Well, the mathematics involves the formalization and quantification of things. Not simply the observance those things exist, but the formalization thereof. Pattern recognition is not per se mathematics. It becomes mathematics when it is quantified and formalized. For example, we all know that a dog can recognize when it is feeding time, but a dog is not a mathematician. Similarly, we all recognize the sun rises in the morning and then sets in the evening. That's not mathematics per se. The mathematics is the quantification thereof that might come in the form of astronomy. We know that days get shorter in winter. Recognizing that pattern is not mathematics. That is recognizing a pattern. It becomes mathematics when there's a degree of quantification involved in it. That's the difference, and therefore, chiral symmetry in smoke signals is not per se mathematics. It becomes mathematics when we start putting some numbers or some figures or some equations behind it. The second issue is in that example of smoke signals, which is incredibly odd. We've all tried creating shapes out of many things. Smoke signals are one example. If you've gone camping, you might have done this. Smoke signals might be important, but they are not mathematics. Simply using these things in day-to-day life is not mathematics. Swirling water counterclockwise or clockwise is not per se mathematics. It might become so when you start to put equations to it. Third, I've no doubt that there's been racism in mathematics. Journal publications might have been gatekept. University positions might have been denied on the basis of discriminatory practices. That should not occur, and discrimination should be discouraged, and it should be illegal where it is not. Discrimination leads to worse outcomes. Discrimination should not occur. Racism should not occur. It leads to worse outcomes. But we need to look at what has been discrimination and what has not been discrimination and what the impact thereof has been. For example, there might have been Indigenous mathematicians who were denied positions, at least historically. However, that doesn't mean that mathematics is per se colonial and bad. It doesn't mean there's a problem necessarily with calculus or linear algebra, or necessarily that these non-mathematical things need to be brought into mathematics. If, for example, there was an Indigenous competitor to linear algebra or calculus, like I've indicated, that should be lionized and brought into the fore. We should acknowledge those types of things if they exist. For example, did journals prevent Indigenous Australians from publishing an equivalent to any of these things? If so, or if they stopped Indigenous mathematicians from publishing, we should acknowledge that it's bad, and we should acknowledge the mathematicians that were denied those opportunities. But ANU's article does not point toward that specific situation. It points toward what is called so-called non-numerical mathematics, whatever that happens to be. The whole thing really looks ridiculous. The idea that you must decolonize something simply because it has white scientists, or historically has had a lot of Europeans in it, is asinine. It can descend into revisionist racism. It further makes universities look like even more of a joke than many of them already do. Universities already have a massive credibility problem. Lionizing identity politics, especially in this type of absurd manner, will make things worse, not better. But do let me know your thoughts about this in the comments below.